In less than 60 seconds, everything Camilla had built over 30 years completely collapsed. It did not happen in the press, and it did not happen with a screaming match. It happened in a perfectly quiet corridor inside Windsor Castle, when she looked up and saw the one face she had spent decades trying to erase, staring back at her from the most important wall in the British monarchy. This is the story of Princess Diana's missing portrait, and how Prince William and Princess Anne weaponized the very institution Camilla thought she controlled to execute a silent, devastating, and entirely irreversible revenge. What Camilla just realized behind closed doors is the staggering difference between the illusion of power and actual institutional ownership. By the end of this, you will understand the secret power grab she attempted, how William uncovered the paper trail, the flawless execution of his retaliation, and Camilla's devastating realization that she actually owns nothing. For a quarter of a century, Camilla operated under the illusion of absolute power. To understand why this retaliation hit with such surgical precision, you have to look back at the devastating psychological warfare she waged against Diana. Throughout the 1980s and 90s, every morning at her estate in Wiltshire, Camilla would sit down with her tea and her morning papers. Those papers were tearing Princess Diana apart on a daily basis. Diana was fighting battles nobody around her was willing to acknowledge. Her marriage had collapsed, she was battling a severe eating disorder, and she was raising 2 boys inside a cold institution. When the tabloids ran savage pieces about Diana's shrinking frame, her tears at public events, or her mental state, Camilla would read them out loud at the table, her aristocratic circle would laugh. They called Diana the clothes horse, a prop meant merely to hang fabric on. Camilla never corrected a single person. She was entertained by the pain of a woman who spent years learning how to absorb a public blow without flinching. Camilla's confidence grew so absolute that she began asserting dominance over the physical spaces of the monarchy the moment she had the chance. The transition of power following the tragic events in Paris in August 1997 was marked by a staggering institutional erasure. Within hours of Diana's death being confirmed, before the public even knew phones inside the palace were ringing, the primary concern was securing crown jewellery. A royal aide was dispatched to Paris while Diana still lay in a hospital room, ensuring items were retrieved before difficult questions could be asked. Meanwhile, Camilla was already moving through the palace. She did not simply unpack her belongings, she sterilized Diana's memory. She ordered the fresh flowers Diana loved to be burned. She had Diana's bedroom locked permanently, ensuring no one would ever sleep in the room where a young mother had cried alone. But her most symbolic act of erasure involved a masterpiece. There was a portrait of Princess Diana painted during the most extraordinary period of her life. It captured her beauty, warmth, and innocence. When the artist finished it, Diana was so deeply moved she held their hands and wept quietly. That portrait was meant to hang in the Hall of Matriarchs at Windsor Castle, a wall reserved for the most important women in the history of the British monarchy. But the moment Camilla secured her grip on the palace, she intervened. She carried the canvas down a corridor with her own hands and shoved it into a dark, dusty storage room. When a staff member offered to assist, Camilla humiliated them so brutally they stepped back in silence. As she closed the storage door, she was smiling like she had just collected a long-awaited prize. For 25 years, she believed that physical triumph was permanent. What Camilla failed to account for was the silent, enduring grief of a son and the fiercely protective memory of a sister-in-law. William was 15 when he walked behind his mother's coffin. He already knew everything. At 16, he finally broke open to a close friend, stating that Camilla had dug her claws into his father and never let go. And that was the reason his mother ended up unprotected in a Paris tunnel. William sealed those words back up inside himself and carried them for the next 25 years. He watched Camilla walk through his mother's rooms, watched the pictures come down, and kept his face perfectly still. But he was not just grieving, he was studying. Princess Anne carried her own wound, one that predated Diana's by decades. Her history with Camilla stretched back 50 years. Before Camilla married Andrew Parker Bowles, he was in a serious relationship with Anne. The royal family shut it down and Anne was forced to step aside. She watched Camilla walk down the aisle toward the man she had loved. Anne absorbed that pain, converting it into something cold, hard, and permanent for decades. She watched this same woman dismantle her brother's marriage and ultimately walk into Buckingham Palace with a crown on her head. Anne never forgot, and she never forgave. The tension between them was palpable, culminating in Anne allegedly telling Camilla directly that she was not the queen, merely the king's wife. The retaliation began, not with a public statement, but with the quiet, devastating weaponization of administrative protocol. William did not wake up one day and act on impulse. he sat in private meetings with palace curators. He reviewed the historical records of every portrait placement inside royal residences going back decades. He ensured that every single rule was followed to the exact letter. He built a fortress of paperwork so flawless and procedurally perfect that no one on earth, not Camilla, not her lawyers, nor any palace official could ever touch it. It was a masterpiece of cold, institutional retaliation. What looked like a routine administrative update was actually a total dismantling of Camilla's empire. The night before the trap was sprung, William sat alone in his study and made a single phone call to Princess Anne. He said simply that she comes home tomorrow. Anne did not hesitate. She replied that it was long overdue and that Diana deserved to come home. Across London, Camilla slept soundly, completely unaware that her dominion was already over. On the morning of the execution, William's team orchestrated a public engagement for Camilla outside of London. It was a perfectly designed decoy to remove her from the building. The moment she departed, the Hall of Matriarchs was sealed off. This was happening in total silence with no official diary entries and no press releases. In the early evening, the portrait was brought out of the storage room where it had languished for over 2 decades. Princess Anne was waiting in the gallery. She had insisted on being there, having waited far too long to let anyone else stand in her place for this moment. As the protective linen and tissue paper were carefully removed, Diana's face came back into the light. The air in the room shifted. Princess Anne stepped forward, looked at the portrait and placed one hand on the edge of the frame, straightening it just slightly. It was the gesture of someone correcting a historical wrong that had sat unresolved for a lifetime. Within 90 minutes, Diana was placed directly beside the late Queen Elizabeth. Everyone present stood in quiet reverence before Anne murmured that Diana belonged there and always did. That evening, Camilla returned to Windsor. She got ready for bed and went to sleep, fully believing she still controlled the walls around her. She had absolutely no idea what was waiting for her just down the hall. The next morning, she was going to wake up, step out of her room, and walk straight into a brutal institutional reality. She was about to discover that all the years of plotting, erasing, and climbing had brought her absolutely nothing, and that the trap William and Anne had set had finally silently snapped shut. The next morning, Camilla stepped out of her private quarters and walked into the corridor just as she had done on countless mornings before. Her pace was relaxed, unhurried, the walk of a woman who believed she owned the very ground beneath her feet. She turned into the Hall of Matriarchs, glanced up, and her reality violently fractured. There, occupying the exact space that had been conspicuously empty for 25 years, was the face of Princess Diana. It was not hidden, it was not minimized, it was displayed with absolute institutional reverence directly beside Queen Elizabeth. Camilla stopped walking. Her body halted completely mid-stride, as if a physical cord between her brain and her legs had been severed. Sources close to the palace describe a reaction of absolute paralyzed shock. For nearly a full minute, she stood in front of that portrait without making a single sound. When the sound finally came, staff members, who were nearby in that corridor, later described it privately as a noise they had never heard from her in all their years of service. It sounded like a sharp gasp of pure panic, the sound of a woman realizing the floor had just dropped out from under her. She immediately went on the offensive, expecting the machine to bend to her will, as it always had. She demanded the portrait be taken down from the wall immediately. The answer that came back from the staff was a polite, immovable no. She demanded an emergency face-to-face meeting with William. The answer that came back was no. The realization began to set in that she could not scream her way out of a procedurally perfect administrative trap. So she turned to her ultimate safety net. She went straight to Charles. She walked into the room where the king was working, stood in front of him, and demanded he fix it. She told him to make the call, to issue the overriding order, to do the very thing he had done for her 100 times over the past 30 years. She expected him to stand between her and the consequences, to break the institution, to accommodate her comfort. She waited for him to be the man who had always chosen her over protocol, over his family, over public opinion. Charles looked at her and he said absolutely nothing. That devastating silence was the psychological climax of a 30-year war. For the first time in his life, Charles did not save her. He could not save her. William had constructed the paperwork so flawlessly that for the king to intervene, he would have to publicly dismantle the very historical protocols that justified his own reign. Charles chose the survival of the crown and the appeasement of his heir over Camilla's pride. Every demand she made, every direction she turned, she was met with a deafening institutional no in that suffocating silence. Camilla was forced to confront a staggering reality she had spent decades ignoring: her commercial desperation. This is the devastating contrast of schadenfreude that shifted the balance of power. For years, Camilla projected the aura of a billionaire monarch, but the forensic truth is that she actually owns nothing. When Queen Elizabeth died, the Duchy of Cornwall transferred immediately and entirely to Prince William. William owns the estates. William controls the primary royal payroll. Camilla's entire lifestyle, the roof over her head, the staff she attempts to command, it is all funded by an estate controlled by the stepson who has never forgotten what she did to his mother. She is essentially a heavily subsidized guest on his property. Her power was a borrowed illusion, and William had just casually reminded her who holds the deed. Just as the walls were closing in on her, Princess Anne walked into the room. Anne looked at Camilla with complete chilling stillness. It was the stillness of a woman who had waited half a century for this precise moment and felt absolutely no need to rush a single second of it. Anne did not raise her voice. She did not gloat. She simply looked at the woman who had tormented her family for decades and delivered 5 words that sealed the tomb. It is what Diana deserved. Anne did not wait for Camilla to respond. She turned around and walked out of the room, leaving Camilla standing completely alone in the echoing silence. This moment was never just about a painting. What looked like a routine administrative update was actually a total dismantling of her empire and the dawn of a new order. The quiet installation of that portrait was the physical manifestation of William taking control of the monarchy's future. It was a clear, unmistakable signal that the era of Camilla's unchecked influence was over. The legacy of Diana, the empathy, the warmth, the profound connection with the public was being formally restored to the heart of the institution. And standing silently beside William in this new era is Catherine. Throughout all the palace turmoil, Catherine has demonstrated the exact quality Camilla never possessed: uncomplaining sacrifice. While Camilla relied on ruthless PR campaigns and aggressive maneuvering to force her way into public acceptance, Catherine absorbed the immense pressure of the crown with quiet dignity. Catherine never demanded a title. She earned her place through years of steady, flawless service. The restoration of Diana's portrait is not just a tribute to the past, it is a protective shield for Catherine's future, ensuring that the matriarchal line of the British monarchy remembers its true heart. Diana's portrait is on that wall, now returning the modern British monarchy to its emotional core. The two women who fundamentally defined the institution for the people. Elizabeth and Diana are finally side by side in the place they always belonged. And there is absolutely nothing Camilla can do about it. No lawyer can challenge it, no press leak can undo it, and no amount of anger can rewrite the historical record. William made certain of that, utilizing the very system that destroyed his mother to silently, cleanly, and permanently avenge her. Thank you for watching. If you found this breakdown of royal dynamics insightful, please consider subscribing for more deep dives into the hidden realities behind palace walls.